welcome to day number 4. Welcome to day number 7. Day number 12.
Welcome to Do It Heartily.
So those are the three main characters, Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. Now, I want to share with you as well some important terms or some important ideas that we see consistently and regularly in the book of Ruth. The first one is, in the Hebrew, it's the word HESED. That's how you say that word, HESED. And it has the idea of to treat somebody kindly or to treat somebody with kindness. Now, it's important for us to understand that this word also goes beyond our normal use of that word, right? It goes beyond how we would normally use the word kindness. We show kindness to usually almost everybody. We'll show kindness to strangers, but this is a different kind of kindness. This actually has a covenant concept to it. It's the idea of a covenant loyalty, a covenant love. It's the idea of this unwavering commitment. It's actually, this word is used as in different places for God's steadfast love for Israel. And so it goes beyond what we think of as kindness. It's more of a covenant committed love. Like, I'm going to treat you with kindness because I'm so committed to you. That's what this word hesed means, and it's sometimes used here as kindness, and we'll see that come up. The other one, actually, I have a couple places where it's used here in the book of Ruth. In Ruth chapter 1 and verse 8, it says, "And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-laws, Go return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as you've dealt with the dead and with me." Kindly, that's chesed, that's kindness, that's covenant love, that God deal with you with this steadfast, unwavering love, even though you've lost your husbands. And again, we'll get into all that. That's what she's using here. In Ruth chapter 2 and verse 20, it says, "Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead." This is, again, that word chesed. I'm just showing you a couple places where it's used here. And in Ruth chapter 3, so we see it in Ruth chapter 1, Ruth chapter 2, Ruth chapter 3, it says, "And he said, Blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter." This is Boaz speaking to Ruth. "For thou hast showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, insomuch as thou followest not young men, whether poor or rich." That's the word hesed again. This covenant, loyalty, steadfast love. We see it over and over and over again in the book of Ruth. Another word that we see used that I want you to know is the word glean or gleaned. That means to gather or to pick up. Okay, we see it a couple different places here in the Bible, in the book of Ruth. In Ruth chapter 2 and verse 2, it says, "And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, Let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him, in whose sight I shall find grace." Right? Let me go pick up. Let me go gather some of these ears of corn. In Ruth chapter 2 and verse 7, it says, "And she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves." So she asked, "Can I go glean? Can I go pick up some of these things?" Here in Ruth chapter 2 and verse 15, it says, "Then when she had risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, Let her glean among the sheaves and reproach her not." Let her do it. Let her pick up some of our harvest. In verses 17 through 19, it says, "So she gleaned in the field until even, and beat out that she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought forth and gave to her that she had reserved after she was sufficed. And her mother-in-law said unto her, What hast thou gleaned today, and where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee." And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, "The man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz." Okay? And so that word again is used, glean. Now, this is important because the word gleaned is used 34 times in the Old Testament. 12 of those times, so about 1 out of every 3, about 33 to 35% of every time that it's used in the Old Testament, it is used here in the book of Ruth. So that's a major occurrence. It's an important word for us to use. Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, uses this word at different times to describe how God intends to gather up his people among all the nations and restore them to their land. In the law, this is important because this is why this is happening, and this is why gleaning is happening here. In the law, God told Israelites to not completely harvest all of their fields. It's interesting, we have a big field right in our backyard that farmers lease, and they plant all sorts of stuff. When we first moved here, it was grass. Since then, we've had garlic planted back there. We've had green beans planted back there. I actually think they're getting ready to plant garlic there again. It was really interesting because they would come through and harvest all of that, but there would be a lot of garlic left over. Now, later on, this farmer out here actually had some people come by on foot with plastic bags and just pick up what was left over. But in Bible times, God commanded the Israelites to leave all of that stuff, and they would leave it there so that people who were poor, people who were widows, people who were strangers in the land could come by and pick up some of that unharvested grain or some of that unharvested corn or whatever it might be, and they could pick it up and have it and use it for their survival. That's how God intended for the people of Israel to take care of those people. So one of the things they would do is they would leave those things ungleaned, they would leave those things unpicked up so that the poor, the strangers, the widows, those kinds of people could come and pick those things up to survive. That's what they were there for. Another major term or idea that's used in the book of Ruth is the idea of a kinsman redeemer. Now, the idea of a kinsman is just the idea of someone that's a close relative. It's somebody that's a close relative. That's really all that it is, and that's what Boaz is referred to in Ruth chapter 2. He's a kinsman, right? Somebody that is a close relative. Now, in the Bible time, somebody that was a kinsman redeemer specifically, and we'll talk more about this when we get into it later in weeks to come, this person had the responsibility of being a protector, a guardian of his family and of his family's rights and of his family's properties. And because of that, the kinsman redeemer of the family would have to perform a lot of duties. Okay, a couple of those things are he could purchase back properties that maybe his family lost or defaulted on or potentially sold. He could also be the person who, and I know this is strange because it's not kind of how we act today, but he could provide an heir for a deceased relative by marrying that relative's wife, or now his widow, and producing a child with her, and he could do that. The kinsman redeemer as well could buy back a family member, not just their property. He could buy back a family member who had maybe been sold into slavery, or maybe one who oftentimes, if somebody couldn't pay their debt, they would have to serve as a slave for somebody else, and a kinsman redeemer could go back and get them. A kinsman redeemer was actually the person who could avenge a relative's murder. If somebody had been murdered in your family, and somebody had not paid the price for that, a kinsman redeemer could actually avenge that by going out and avenging a relative's death that way. Again, I'm not saying that's the way we do it today. That was part of God's intended law for the children of Israel at that time. Okay, we have different laws today. But I want you to think about these ideas of a kinsman redeemer, and here's a question that I'll end with today. Who do all of these remind you? What are these all a picture of? Okay, these are all a picture of what or who? Okay, somebody who's steadfast and committed in their covenant love. Okay, somebody who is leaving something extra behind for others, right? The idea of someone who is willing to redeem another person, right? Somebody has this covenant love, who's leaving something for other people, and who is willing to redeem or buy back somebody who is a slave or can't do it for themselves. These are all pictures of who or what? These are actually, you'll see as we go through the book of Ruth, these are all pictures of Jesus Christ. We see this picture of covenant love. The Bible tells us God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Romans 5:8 tells us God commended his love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Right? Jesus could keep all of his glory and all the benefits of being the Son of God to himself. But the Bible tells us that when we trust Jesus Christ as Savior, the book of Romans tells us that we are joint heirs with Christ. And so we join in that with him. The idea of redeeming, right? Redeeming another person. The Bible, that's one of the words the Bible uses for our salvation, right? That we're not redeemed with corruptible things like silver and gold, but with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. We're going to see the picture of what Jesus Christ did for us as lost sinners over and over and over again in the book of Ruth. And we see Jesus becoming human. That's how Jesus becomes our kinsman redeemer. He's obviously not related to us by blood, but he's our kinsman by leaving the glories of heaven, coming to earth and taking on flesh, becoming 100% human, just like we are, right? But he's also 100% God, therefore he can pay our price that we can't pay. He can be our sacrifice that we couldn't be. He becomes our redeemer. And all of those things are pictured here in this beautiful story, and this is just the beginning. Along the way, we're going to see how God providentially guides and blesses all of those people who trust in him. Now, the book of Ruth seems almost like it could be written as a Disney movie, and you'll see this how it plays out. Each one of those movies or each one of those stories starts out with the phrase "Once upon a time." Right? Once upon a time, there was this person, there was this princess, and there's this great tragedy. There was a damsel in distress, and Prince Charming comes in to save the day. Right? Well, this is not some made-up story. This is real. This really happened. These are real people, and I want you to see how Ruth 1 and verse 1 starts. It says, "Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons." Notice it says, "Now it came to pass in the days." Again, it almost starts out like once upon a time. As with most good stories, that's how it starts out, and that's how the book of Ruth starts out. But again, this one is true, and there is some great tragedy that comes right at the very beginning. However, our response to the tragedy is just as important, if not more important, than the tragedy itself. And I want to encourage you to come back next week, because next week I'm going to share with you 3 major mistakes to avoid when tragedy hits in your life or when hardship hits in your life. And I want to share those with you next week to help you, so that, because the reality is life isn't easy. We know that, right? And sometimes hard things happen. And I think the best thing for us to do is to prepare for those hard things, not to react to them, because when we react in the flesh. We do things we wish we wouldn't, all of those kinds of things. But if our heart is prepared for those moments ahead of time, not pessimistically like, oh boy, something bad's going to happen, and I'm always on guard. That's what I'm talking about, right? But we need to understand that our response to the difficulties of life are often just as important, if not more important, than the difficulties itself. So come back next week. I'm going to share with you just 3 practical ways, things that we can do in our spirits, in our lives, to guard against those difficulties. So now that you have your mind somewhat wrapped around the book of Ruth, we've laid that groundwork. I look forward to jumping in with you next week, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. We'll talk to you later.